Good morning, everyone. My name is André Banning. I'm chairing the Feed and Nutrition Network, and we organized this webinar today, which is about mitigating enteric methane. I'm chairing this network group, but soon it will change to another chair, actually, which will be one of the presenters today, David Janès. We have been silent without webinars for quite some time, so I'm quite happy to have this webinar. Just to a reminder for everyone attending, next year, together with the GGAA conference in Florida, we will have another physical FNN meeting over there. So you're welcome to attend that meeting as well if you visit that conference. Today we have several presenters, but I will not chair this session myself. It will be chaired by the chair of the Livestock Research Group of the Global Research Alliance, which is Sinead Waters. She will introduce every speaker and will moderate the discussions. The work presented today is from collaborative work that we did as a Feed and Nutrition Network. It is work originating from the Global Network Project led by Alex Christoph, and which is expired already, but still some work is coming and new work is being presented today to you. And other work from a more recent project, the CEDARS project, that will be presented next year at the FNN in association with the GGAA. So today is mainly the Global Network project work. And then now I want to give the word to Sinead.
Thank you, Andre, and very welcome everybody to this very exciting webinar. So you're all very welcome to this morning's Feed and Nutrition Network webinar. And the title of this morning's webinar, as Andre mentioned, is Mitigating Enteric Methane. And this webinar really couldn't come at a more opportune time for us, considering, I guess, the latest internet pledges from countries around the world in order to reduce methane emissions, but also following discussions at COP26 more recently. So we're under massive pressure and there's an urgency around the world to reduce methane emissions, and particularly biogenic methane, which we're going to speak about this morning. So I guess my name is Sinead Waters. As Andre mentioned, I am one of the co-chairs of the Livestock Research Group of the Global Research Alliance for Climate Change. And I'm based in Teagasc in Ireland, just to say that for those who don't know me. And I'll be joined by Andre this morning as we go through this session. I guess we would like to thank as well from the Livestock Research Group to thank Andre and his co-leads for coordinating this network over the last year, and particularly during difficult times, particularly during COVID, when a lot of the work was done remotely. So this morning's webinar will run for a total of 90 minutes. And it will consist of 4 presentations from speakers around the globe. So it's very exciting to be different areas of the world with different types of feeding systems. And they're going to give us an insight into very large projects and what's going on in their countries and their areas. So each presentation will be followed by a 5-minute Q&A session. So I would really welcome you to put questions into the Q&A or some comments into the Q&A function, and so that we can actually have some questions for the end of the presentations and for discussions as well. We'll also have some time at the end of the presentations in order to have a final Q&A with the panelists towards the end of the webinar. And just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded and the video will be made available for future viewings via the GRA website. And as I said, please submit your questions. If you see a question that you like, also please like it on the system. And if it's particularly, we'll know then that it is a popular question that we can take. Also, if you see your question is not answered or you feel it's been dismissed, please don't worry, because we get lots of questions and these will be dealt with after the webinar, and we'll be dealing with all the questions and make those available at a later date. So without further ado, we're going to move to our first speaker. So our first speaker today is Claudia Arndt, who is a senior scientist at the International Livestock Research Institute of Nairobi in Kenya. And she's also co-lead of the Mazingira Center. So Claudia is going to speak to us today about strategies to mitigate enteric methane emissions by ruminants and how we can meet the 1.5-degree climate target by 2030, but not by 2050. So over to you, Claudia, and thank you very much for your presentation this morning.
Thank you very much, Sinead, for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen here right now and turn off my video just during the presentation to make sure that you can hear everything all right. I assume you can see the presentation well. Is that the case?
Yes, Claudia, perfect,
okay.
Thank you.
Perfect, perfect. So first of all, okay, let me turn off the video. I can't anymore, so I leave it on. If you get issues with the video, please let me know. So first of all, I would like to thank all my co-authors on this paper. This work has started a long time ago, when 3 jobs of mine ago, actually in 2015, when I was a postdoc with the Environmental Defense Fund in California and was working with Alex, who is senior contributing consultant with us. And we did it underneath the Global Research Network, right? So the background to this work is that livestock and tariff fermentation contributes about 30% of anthropogenic methane emissions. And we know that global demand for red meat and milk protein is projected to increase and has been increasing steadily over the recent or over time, just because of population growth, but also increases in demand. And we also know that methane is a short-lived climate pollutant, which means that it has only a lifetime of 12 years. So that means if we do mitigate methane today, in 12 years, we will see an effect of this. And with the prospect that we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we really need to put strategies into place to reduce methane, because that will only allow us to stay within that warming. And the IPCC has done several models where they predicted that agricultural methane emissions need to be reduced relative to 2010 by between 11 and 30% by 2030 and between 24 and 47% by 2050. And as methane emissions from agriculture to vast extent come from enteric methane emissions, we need to have strategies to reduce these enteric methane emissions. And for this, our objective was to do a meta-analysis to determine mitigation strategies for enteric methane emissions that do not compromise animal performance or have other unacceptable trade-offs, because we know that we still need to satisfy the increasing demand for livestock products. And then as we worked on our on that meta-analysis and try to get it published in a high-impact journal, to get it visible to policymakers as well, to make sure that these strategies are really picked up on. We also added actually the impact that these strategies will have into the manuscript by estimating the potential of these identified strategies that we have in the meta-analysis, to look at how they can contribute to this 1.5 degrees Celsius target by 2030 and 2050. And one thing also I haven't said yet, this is really the first really comprehensive study on mitigation strategies that looks at a lot of different strategies in a quantitative manner. Because often there are studies out there that have done qualitative estimates, but we haven't looked, there are no studies that looked at a quantitative measure on mitigation of enteric methane and also the effects of animal production. And for this, we did a systematic literature review in which we included in vivo studies from 1964 to 2018. We found a total of 652 publications, and based on our inclusion criteria, we included 425 studies in the final meta-analysis, and the meta-analysis that we did was a random effects meta-analysis that was weighted by inverse variance. The mitigation strategies that we did classify were we put into two categories. One is the ABS strategies that reduced absolute enteric methane emissions while maintaining or increasing animal productivity. And then we have the product-based strategies that reduce product-based enteric methane emissions. So that means methane emissions per kilogram of meat or milk while increasing animal productivity. And for the modeling, we modeled the potential of the identified strategies to decrease the methane emissions globally, and for Africa and Europe to basically show how these strategies can be used differently in low middle income countries and in high income countries. And we looked at how can we reduce emission between 2010 and 2030 and between 2010 and 2050. And we did use 3 mitigation strategies. One that just looked at the adaptation of one product-based strategy. The second scenario was the adaptation of one absolute mitigation strategy. And in the third scenario, we looked at the adaptation of one product and one absolute mitigation strategy at the same time. Here we assume that the product-based strategy and the absolute strategy would be additive. That means if we have a reduction of a product-based strategy, we would have of 10% and of an absolute mitigation strategy of 20% of reductions of methane, we would have a total of 30% reduction. So just so you understand what we mean by additive. And in general, when we looked at the mitigation, we would assume the average mitigation of the identified strategies, and we would show the maximum and minimum reduction potential by using what was the most effective mitigation strategies and the least effective mitigation strategy that we identified. We looked at a total of over 98 mitigation strategies that were classified into animal and feed management, diet formulation, and room manipulation. And we do have a preprint out. The paper is not published yet. It's still in revision. We're waiting back any day to hear if it gets finally accepted or not. But you can look more detail on the different strategies that we all looked at into the preprint and get more information than I'm able to give you today in the presentation. But overall, we found that 8 effective mitigation strategies, of which 5 were absolute mitigation strategies and 3 were product-based mitigation strategies. And here you see the strategies themselves and the potential emission reduction of the strategies as methane intensity for milk or gain. That means the methane intensity for milk is the emissions per kilogram of milk, and here you see the reduction. And here's the methane intensity for gain, which is per average daily gain. And here, for example, you see that we didn't have enough data available to evaluate it. When we looked at selected production criteria for milk, we saw no effect, and for gain, we also saw no effect. So just to understand the table, these symbols here signify which production system the strategy is applicable for. So the 2 barns basically is feedlot and mixed systems. And then where you have the grass, this is for grassland systems, the mitigation strategy. So for the absolute mitigation strategies, we had as most effective in reducing methane intensity for milk was methane inhibitors, such as Bovaer. And we saw that it reduced methane intensity for milk by 32% and had no effect on milk or gain. And second most effective were tanniniferous forages that could be also used in grassland systems, which is the only one that was able to be used in grassland systems of the ABS strategies and reduced methane intensity for milk by 18% without affecting milk or gain. And the third most effective one was the electron sinks with the -13, -12 for the mitigation of methane intensity for milk and gain. And we even saw an increase in milk, a slight increase in milk production for the electron sinks from milk. The fourth strategy that we identified were the supplementation of oil and fats. And we found a decrease of emission intensities for milk of 12 and for gain of 22%, again with no effect on milk production or average daily gain. And last strategy was oil seeds that we identified, which is only for applicable to lactating animals based on the data that we analyzed, because it reduced the methane intensity for milk by 12% without affecting milk production. For gain, we didn't have a methane intensity for gain, we didn't have enough data, but we also saw a reduction of 13% in average daily gain. That's why we're saying it's from the data we've analyzed, it is not, applicable for feedlot systems for beef cattle. And we go to the product-based strategies, we really found a decrease in the effect of methane intensity for milk, an increasing feeding level of 17%, and increases in milk production and gain. And gain was quite high actually. And the other strategy was decreasing grass maturity, where we also found a decrease in methane emission intensity for milk by 13% and an increase in milk production by 9%. Unfortunately, for the average daily gain, we did have no data. And then the last strategy, which had a reduction in methane intensity for milk and gain of 9%, was a decreasing dietary forage to concentrate ratio. And we saw increases in milk and gain about 20%. So one thing to take out of this chart is that we have very little absolute methane mitigation strategies for actually pasture-based systems. And we have product strategies that reduce product-based emissions for both systems here, for grass and for feedlot systems. And when we looked at the effect of 100% adoption of enteric methane mitigation strategies on global and regional enteric methane emissions from 2010 to 2030. So here we need to reduce emissions by at least 11%, which is indicated by the blue dotted line. Just for you to understand the chart, here we have predicted change in enteric emissions between 2010 and 2030 on a global scale, African and European scale, and the different bars indicate that strategy is implemented. So for the gray bar, we have no strategy implemented, so that's basically BAO. So we expect that emissions are going to increase by 39% if we don't do, if we just are as business as usual. If we implement one product-based strategy, we will see an increase of emissions by 24%. If we implement one of the absolute mitigation strategies, we will reduce or have an increase in emissions between 2010 and 2030 by 15%. And if we have a simultaneous implementation of one product and one absolute mitigation strategy, we'll see an increase of 3%. The arrow bar that you're seeing here is basically, these are the both maximum mitigation strategies for product-based and absolute mitigation. So that would be putting a methane inhibitor into the animals and increasing feeding level. So if we did this in 100% of the farms, we would be able to reach the target globally. Now, when we look at for the African region, we actually have a expected increase in enteric methane emissions by 87%. So even though we're significantly reducing emissions, which is still important, even though we can't hit the target, we will not be able to reach the target just because of the circumstances that we have a growing population, we have a growing demand per capita, and overall higher emissions per product, which leads to what we're seeing here. Well, when we look at the European region that we picked to represent a high income country, we see that we only would expect an increase in enteric methane emissions by 11%. Is because the population growth is not going to be as much. Emissions per product are generally lower, and demand per capita is not going to be going significantly up because there's already a high consumption of animal protein. And you can see actually here that we can reach within the European region the target that we're looking for in multiple ways. I'm going to go quickly through this just because looking at time. So this is the same graph between 2010 and 2050. And here you can actually see that globally with the strategies that we identified, we cannot reach the target. And for the African region, neither, and for the European region, they can still reach that target of reducing emissions here by 24% to 47%. That brings me to the conclusion that we identified 8 effective strategies to reduce enteric methane emissions. 5 of these would reduce absolute emissions and decrease absolute methane emissions by 21% on average, ranging from the minimum reduction of 12% to the maximum reduction of 35%. And we decrease product-based emissions by on average 17%, ranging from minimum 12 to maximum 22%, but we do need more strategies actually for grassland-based systems, which also is very important, especially for low middle income countries, because a lot of these cattle are actually on rangelands or on grassland-based systems. So a lot of emissions come from these systems. That's why it's important that we need to look further into other strategies to work in grassland-based systems. And then we have the 3 product-based strategies that decrease product-based greenhouse enteric methane emissions by on average 12%, ranging from 9 to 17%, and the increased animal productivity by a median of 17%, ranging from 9 to 162%. As I said, the potential of the identified mitigation strategies to contribute to the 1.5 degrees Celsius target by 2030 and 2050. Globally, we can reach it at by 2030, but only if we really have a 100% adoption rate. So it's a little bit, probably not going to happen. So there will need to be other measures as well. And the mitigation strategies that we identified are insufficient to meet the 2050 target. The low middle income countries, we can't hit the target with the identified strategies because of other circumstances, while in high income countries we can do that. Bringing us to the implications that enteric methane emissions can be successfully reduced by various mitigation strategies, but then the practical implementation, which the adoption rate, will depend on proven long-term effects, economic feasibility, government policies, and consumer acceptance. And on top of that, we need additional measures to reduce enteric methane emissions to reach the 1.5 target by 2050. And with that, I want to thank in the name of all our authors to everybody for listening to the presentation, and I'm happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for a very clear presentation. So we have lots of questions, so thank you to the audience for that. The first one is from Catherine. She says, globally, grassland systems play an important role. Which mitigation strategies do you consider most effective? Feed additives are hard to implement in those systems. And that has got, a lot of 3 likes as well. So
yeah, this is what we don't recommend it, right? Feed additives, the inhibitor is not recommended for grassland systems because it's not ready. I know Bovaer, they're working on having a strategy or packaging the 3-NOP in a way that it can work in grassland systems. But then we're also looking at dairy systems where we interact regularly with the animals. So it's a big challenge.
Yeah, slow release options, of course, but it's very much in a research stage, as you kind of say. Another question here from Alice: did these mitigation strategies and accompanying emissions intensity reduction take into consideration the cost aspect of mitigation? And of course, that's always important.
No, we're commenting to it in the manuscript, and you can look at it. The thing is that the costs are going to be different for each country as well, because you're always going to have different milk prices or your meat prices and different prices for the supplementation. So we did not do a marginal abatement cost curve on that. It would certainly be interested to do that, but here in this work, it wasn't done.
Okay, and next question. We've lots and lots of questions. We won't get to them all. One here from Anne: including GHG from feed production often show that concentrate, it's hopping around my screen, from concentrate had a higher carbon footprint compared to forage. It often levels out the effect of the reduced methane if you calculate the carbon footprint per kilogram of product.
We did discuss that in the paper. We did not find the same result because usually the emissions are different, and the emissions associated with feed production are nitrous oxide emissions rather than methane emissions. So we're switching in between pollutant here. And then the question is, do we account for potential carbon release or not? So I think we're getting in a really difficult space here, depending on what is the original, like the
Mm.
bow scenario and where we're going. And
Okay.
but I do think it leaves room for other modeling scenarios with these mitigation
Modeling and-
strategies for sure.
Yeah, and life cycle analysis, I guess, as well. So, no, a final question. I'll take the others in the final session. But one here from Daniel: do you think the recent inventions, 3NOP, which is of course Bovaer, and seaweed, has a chance to propel us to our targets if well harnessed, and I guess well implemented?
They are not based on Graceland systems, so we couldn't just use these strategies. And the seaweed, I know it's a hot topic because everybody looks at it as a natural compound. And I feel like the shortcomings with seaweed, like we didn't have enough studies in our meta-analysis because of because the cutoff was 2018 to do the evaluation. But there are a lot of other shortcomings with seaweed that need to be still researched and everything. It's not ready, and problems associated with it. I know some people like to look at it as a golden bullet or a silver bullet, but I think we need to be critical on that. Yeah.
Yeah, probably more. Okay, thank you, Claudia. We'll have to move on. I have lots of other questions, and we'll take them at the end. But we do, in the interest of time, I think we do need to move on. And our next speaker, we're moving to Europe now, and our next speakers are from Spain. So we have a joint effort here from Dr. David Yanis Rus from CSIC with his collaborator, Dr. Alejandro de Blanche. Dr. Alejandro de Blanche is from the University of Zaragoza, from the vet faculty, and today they will present a paper co-authored on the prediction of enteric methane production and yield in sheep using an intercontinental database. And at the beginning, David is going to start and he's going to introduce the sheep database, and he'll be followed by Alejandro, who's going to speak about the methodology and the results. So over to you, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sinead, and thank you, DRA, for organizing. Thank you, Andrea, as well, for chairing and organizing the webinar. I'm going to just give a few words about the start of this project, which started as part of the Global Network project, which was mentioned by Andre and Claudia. The Global Network project was part of the Feed and Nutrition Network. And if you can pass the slide, Alejandro, please. And basically, it's a project that was coordinated by Alex Christoph from Penn State University, and which other partners from Ireland, UK, Spain, and France, and Finland participated. And one of the objectives was to develop and evaluate existing models to improve the prediction of enteric methane production in ruminants, trying to cover a range of nutritional, animal, and production systems, management systems. So under that objective, we produced 2 papers, and you might be aware of. The first one was trying to improve these prediction equations in dairy cattle, and it's the paper you have on the left-hand side of the slide. And then another one on beef cattle system, which is the one you have on the right-hand side. In both cases, these papers were based on a collaboratory effort in which thousands of data from individual animals, from individual methane records were gathered and analyzed from different countries, around 15 countries in dairy cattle and 10 countries in beef cattle. And that allowed us to produce not only equations that could be used globally, but also specific equations from different regions of the world. In the dairy cattle systems, for instance, we could produce specific equations for Europe and the United States. And the beef cattle paper, we could also have specific equations for different kind of diets. So if you can pass to the next one, Alejandro. But this kind of international exercise hadn't happened for sheep, despite the economic and social importance of sheep production systems. We know that the IPCC already had a tier 2 emission factors provided in 2006, in which it was distinguishing between young and adult sheep. And then these emission factors were updated in the latest guidelines published in 2019 with some modifications. But we know that these factors come from data that represent a limited range of production systems. And the idea is to try to expand and produce factors and prediction equations that can cover as many systems as possible. So under this aim is where we started this project. And if you pass, Alejandro, basically we started to gather data from individual animals from different research groups, as we did for dairy cattle and beef cattle. And this is a representation of the different countries that initially started to provide data. And then Alejandro is going to provide details of how these data were filtered and analyzed, and then how we can interpret the results that we obtained. So Alejandro, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, David. So as David mentioned, the standing IPCC recommendations are very simplistic, and the recommendation is that for all sheep, we should consider that the methane emissions are 6.7% of the gross energy intake. And we think that that can be improved. That's why there is uncertainty on the emissions, but there is opportunity to improve. And this intercontinental sheep database was, as David mentioned, collected from different countries. And in total, it had more than 10,000 individual animal records from sheep. This database had information about methane, but as well some studies, they have information from the diet composition in terms of dry matter intake, gross energy, crude protein, NDF, etc. As well, we have it was specified the breed, the age of the animal, the body weight, sex, the way the methane was measured. Most of the studies were coming from methane chambers, respirometric chambers, although as well some a small proportion was from SF6 or green feed. Some studies as well provided information about digestibility or rumen fermentation in terms of pH, ammonia, or volatile fatty acid proportions. There was in total 18 breeds, so it's quite representative of the overall population of sheep in the world. And it was quite balanced in terms of males and females. And as well, we have about 2/3 of the animals were young animals, so less than 12 months, and 1/3 was all adult animals. The first thing we did was to remove, to do a data harmonization and to remove the feed additives, which could artificially decrease the methane emissions that will be expected according to the diet composition. As well, we remove data from one big study from New Zealand in which they use high and low methane emitters. We were selected for having these emissions, so as well we remove that. And then we remove outliers with the interquartile range. Here we have the refined database, which you can see we have in total 2,135. And you can see a huge variation in terms of dry matter intake and as well in terms of body weight. But in terms of methane yield, methane emissions, we see that they represent 6.3% of the gross energy intake, which is very much similar to the IPCC recommendation. As well, we split this database in different sub databases. For example, for age, to develop age-specific equations, we split the data in adult sheep or young sheep, as well for feed-specific subsets, or forage diets or mixed diets. And as well, we split the data for according to the climate, following the Köppen classification. So we classify countries with warm climate and countries with temperate climate in order to see if the equations are valid across different climatic regions. The way we did the modeling was very much following the recommendations of Van Lingen that published the paper that David mentioned before. Basically, the methane prediction equations were based on linear mixed effects model using the program Elmer in R. And basically, what we did was to increase sequentially the number of variables. So we have, for example, the methane production is equal to the intercept, which will be the basal methane emission when the animal doesn't eat anything. And then we include factors for example, the dry matter intake and other factors. We include the study as a random effect in order to remove variability across the studies. And the model should only include those variables that help to improve the prediction. In total, we evaluate 12 different types of models, some of them in which we force the model to include the variable, for example, for dry matter intake, gross energy intake, dry matter intake plus body weight, dry matter intake or organic matter digestibility and body weight. And then we have another group of models in which we allow the model to choose which variables are the best. For example, the diet model, in which we include dry matter intake, feed composition, the animal model, in which we include as well body weight, the animal with no dry matter intake, we include only body weight and diet composition, the animal volatile fatty acid, which include dry matter intake, diet composition, body weight, and fatty acids, rumen fatty acids, and finally the global model, which includes all of them. As well, we evaluate the standing IPCC models to see if they are good or our models are better than the IPCC ones. Finally, we did a cross-validation to avoid a model overfitting, and we calculate the root mean square prediction error, the standard deviation error, and the correlation coefficient. So here we move to the results, and you see the universal equations for prediction of methane production. I have classified them from the top, which are the best ones in terms of lower prediction error, to the bottom one, which are the worst equations. And you can see that in all of them, in all the good ones, we have dry matter intake as a key predictor variable, which is already known. But as well, we have body weight appears in most of them. So it seems that the body weight is relevant and is positively related with methane emissions. Then we have as well the rumen fatty acid proportions in terms of propionate, which is negatively correlated with methane emissions, and acetate and butyrate is positively correlated. This is because the stoichiometry of the methane production. And then we have, in some equations, appear organic matter digestibility, which is positively correlated, and the diet composition normally is not very strong. It doesn't have a very strong effect about the diet. We will discuss that later on. So here we see what are the most promising equations for using as a universal. So the most promising one should be the one which is include dry matter intake, propionate, and body weight. Here we include as well this one, which is dry matter intake and body weight, because it's relatively easy to implement. On the bottom, in red, we see that the IPCC equations are performing poorly in comparison with the ones that we have developed. The animal with no dry matter intake, of course, is the one that performs the worst, because the dry matter intake is a key driver in estimating methane. Here we have the plot with the most promising one, and here on the bottom are the IPCC equations. And we observe that the IPCC equations have a high prediction error and a high slope bias. That is meaning that they underestimate the low end and they overestimate the high end. And one of the reasons is because they lack of intercept. So which is the amount of methane produced when the animal doesn't eat. As well, we evaluate this universal equation for different subsets. And we observe that this universal equation don't perform particularly well for young animals or for mixed diets. So that means that there is a need to develop age-specific or feed-specific models. On the contrary, this universal equation, they have similar performance for different climate regions. So that means that there is no need to develop climate-specific or country-specific equations according to our database. So we did a second analysis by splitting the data, and we developed age-specific equation. For example, for adult sheep, which are those animals with more than 1 year old, dry matter intake is a key driver. And as well, we have the propionate, which is as well a good indicator of the methane. The ADF as well is positively correlated with methane emission in these adult sheep. But we could use for adult sheep probably the universal equation, because these ones are very similar. A different story is for young sheep. For young sheep, it's more difficult to develop the equation, and you can see that the prediction error is slightly higher. In this case, the dry matter intake, again, is a key aspect, but here we have the body weight, which is very important in young animals. As well, the vola fatty acid proportions is selected as a key predictor, and the NDF as well. Then we develop as well forage-specific equations, and for those diets with forage, again, the dry matter intake is a key driver, body weight as well, and then we have the propionate or organic matter digestibility. What is more difficult to estimate is equations for mixed diets, and you can see these are the ones with the higher prediction error. Dry matter intake is again important, but here we have to include body weight, organic matter digestibility, and diet composition seems to be as well, in this case, relevant to improve the prediction. We as well try to develop universal equations for methane yield, so grams of methane per kilogram of dry matter intake. This is quite difficult because the methane yield is kind of more constant than the methane production, and that's why the correlation coefficient is much lower than with the previous ones. But we observe some important aspects. For example, the dry matter intake seems to be negatively correlated with methane yield. And that is because if the animal is eating more, the rumen retention time tends to be lower, and at the end, the methane yield is lower. The body weight is positively correlated with methane yield. And that is because when we feed animals at the same intake, the big animals, they have a lower feeding level. And that means that they have a higher retention time and at the end, a higher yield. The organic matter digestibility as well was positively correlated because as more digestible, more rumen fermentation and more methane yield. What was surprising is that the diet composition didn't seem to have a huge impact in the predictions. And that could be explained by at least 3 reasons. One is that, we should expect that the NDF or fiber is positively correlated with methane emissions. But as well, it's true that fibrous diet, they have a lower digestibility. So at the end is a side effect. And it seems to be, has been described that only the NDF and methane emissions are correlated when they concentrate with the forage diet, when the forage proportion in the diet is less than 65%, which was not the case in most of the data from our study. As well, the fat content of our diets was low and lower than diet for cattle. So probably that explains why the heterostack doesn't get into the equations. And as well, the sheep, they have a high capacity to select the diet. So it's much more than the cattle. And that indicates that it's quite difficult to really know what is the chemical composition of the feed that the animal is eating. So the conclusions are that there is an urgent need to develop equations to predict methane emission from sheep because the IPCC recommendation led to high prediction errors. Universal equations should include dry matter intake as a key variable, although including body weight or vola fatty acid proportion substantially increased prediction performance. On the contrary, diet composition variables have a low correlation with methane emission in our database. The universal equations are valid across various climatic regions. And on the contrary, there is a need to develop age-specific and diet-specific equations. For example, for adult sheep, we should include dry matter intake and vola fatty acid proportions. For young sheep or forage diets, we should include as well body weight as a key indicator. And for mixed diets, we should include all those variables, but as well some information about diet composition. So thank you very much for your attention, and we are happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Alejandro and David, for a very excellent presentation and very thorough. We're running out of time. There's one question here that I might ask you, Alejandro, if I can understand it correctly. It's from Thailand. If we exclude data not using protozoa defaunation, how do we calculate the CH4 formula as Alejandro explained? Is it possible to exclude data as other slopes? I don't know if you see that question there in the chat or in the Q&A, sorry.
We remove all the treatments which include some additives or some manipulation of the rumen that could artificially alter the methane emissions, because we wanted to know what is the background emissions of the control treatments.
Control,
so,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yeah,
so,
no, I understand that. So
we only keep the controls, really.
Yeah. So you keep the animals that there's been no treatment applied to. So that's
Yes,
the answer
yes.
there. Yeah, exactly.
Unless the treatment is a diet. If the diet is,
of course,
relevant.
Yeah. Thank you, Alejandro. Another question here from Sega. Can these developed equations be applied to farming systems in sub-Saharan Africa? And if so, have you estimated the uncertainty?
We didn't have data from Africa. Well, we have data from Egypt. So, but yeah, it depends on what are the type of diets they use. But in theory, these equations should be kind of valid across the universal ones will be valid across the world because they have been developed with a huge variety of different diets.
Okay, and I have a final question here from Alice. What equations would you recommend for grazing systems where DMI determination is challenging, yet DMI is such a key component?
I will include dry matter intake if it's available, body weight, propionate if you can take rumen samples. And then if it's available, the organic matter digestibility will be even better, but that sometimes is tricky to get.
That's great, Alejandro. In the interest of time, we might move on and we might take this up again at the end. And thank you to yourself and David. We're going to move on now to Latin America. So our next speaker is Dr. Guilhermo de Sousa Congio from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, South America. And Guilhermo's presentation today is entitled Latin America Methane Flagship, Strategies for Mitigation and Prediction Models. So thank you very much, Guilhermo. Do you want to, share your screen? That's perfect, we can see. Thank you very much. Off you go.
Okay, so just a minute and sorry, I'll share again.
Yeah, we can see.
But I cannot move the slides.
Okay.
Sorry. I will turn off the video to try again. Sorry.
Yeah, try turn off the video and see if that helps.
Sorry. Can you see it right now?
Yes, I can see. If you go into your presentation mode, Guilhermo, that'd be great.
Okay, it's in presentation mode.
Not yet, but
right now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, sorry for the delay. So thank you.
That's okay. It's okay. Yeah, thank you, Guilhermo. That's great.
Okay, thank you, Sinead, for the presentation. Today we're gonna share the results from the Latin American Methane Project briefly. So it was can move the slides. Oh, sorry. Yes, it's okay. So it was a 2-year project funded by New Zealand government through the Ag Research and to support the livestock research objectives of the livestock research group from the GRA. The project, Alex was the project leader, and Andre provided technical support, and the organizational support was provided by Olgan and Agrosal in Colombia. So a brief previous an overview highlighting the impact of the ruminant livestock and the indirect methane on climate change. So they have a large contribution in the total greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector, and the indirect methane is the main greenhouse gas source. And according to IPCC, the global methane emission needs to be reduced by 35% for limiting the global warming to 1.5 degrees until 2050. And so there is it's important to find feasible solutions for the methane mitigation strategies at the local level. And about the region, so Latin America is an important livestock region with a large herd and which provides animal protein worldwide. So the livestock sector is also important for livelihoods and the reduction of local poverty. However, the Latin American countries still use the methane emission factor equations from IPCC to calculate the greenhouse gas inventory. So it's important to develop more accurate equations focused on typical production systems in Latin America. So the first step to meet our goals was to collate a database containing or including in vivo data from studies conducted in the Latin America, and then use it for two different purposes. First, to identify indirect methane mitigation strategies which don't compromise animal performance, and second, to develop equations to predict indirect methane emissions. So it was spent about almost 1 year to build the Latin America database, which contained 4,200 individual animal records, including beef, 49% of beef, 41% for dairy cattle, and 10% of sheep data. So the data came from 71 researchers from 26 institutions across Latin America, and with 71% of all data coming only from Brazil, followed by Colombia, Mexico, Colombia, Costa Rica, Argentina, Peru, Chile, and Uruguay. So first, look into the first objective of identify indirect methane mitigation strategies. So we used an approach like used by Claudia, it's similar, and an outlier screening followed by a subdivision of the potential mitigation strategies in categories and subcategories. And then we performed a random effect meta-analysis weighted by inverse variance using the CMA software. So the main forage source, according to feeding systems, for grazing systems, the tropical grasses, Urocloa, Megathyrsus, and Penicetum were most frequent. For beef feedlot, were corn silage and tropical haze. For dairy confinements, corn silage and corn silage plus temperate haze. And for sheep confinement, tropical haze and fresh cut grass. The main beef breeds were Nelore and Angus, the main dairy breeds Holstein Jersey, and Holstein Deer, and the main sheep breeds Texel and Polworth and Santenase sheep. And 34 potential strategies were evaluated, and among them, 16 strategies were able to decrease methane emissions with no negative effect on animal performance. So these strategies were related to animal breeding, this in green. Strategies related to dietary manipulation, such as improved pasture management, increased dietary protein, increased concentrate level, increased dietary lipids, and increased in feeding level. And in blue, rumen manipulation. So strategies such as mono zinc and then nitrate supplementation and coniferous forests. And among these 16 effective strategies, only 6 strategies decreased the methane emissions while increasing the milk yield or average daily gain. So increased animal performance. So the crossbreed Holstein Deer, improved grazing strategies for continuous and rotational stocking management. That mean sward structures that improve the herbage intake by grazing ruminants. Strategies related to increase dietary protein, cotton seed supplementation, and increasing feeding level, decrease methane emissions, and increase the animal performance. So some important remarks of this first part, defining methane mitigation strategy. So 58% of the studies were under grazing. So the grazing studies were, the grazing systems were underrepresented in our database. So more research in addressing these feeding systems needed. More options intended to decrease methane intensity and methane yield rather than methane production in grams per day. I think that's only 2 strategies decreased methane in grams per day, so increased dietary lipids and nitrate supplementation. More research is needed to be addressed for some promising strategies which decrease both metrics, so like bromoform weeds and 3-NOP. There are no research in Latin America. And more efforts to validate existing mitigation technologies under confinement for grazing ruminants. So strategies related to monoenzyme supplementation, nitrate supplementation, and coniferous forests were effective only for confinement studies, confinement systems. So all this information is better detailed in this open access paper, which was recently published. So it's open access. So moving to the second goal. Sorry, the fast, but we have more results. But now looking to the second goal, developing equations for predicting methane emissions. For this phase, we received a support from the Ermias and his team. Adeline also helped, and Latin American collaborator also helped me, João Paulo. So, and for this phase, we followed the same approach presented by Alejandro, which was the same approach for the previous global network papers, the dairy and sheep manuscript. Basically, for this phase, for the modeling part, we managed the 3 data sets independent, so separated. One analysis for beef cattle, one analysis for dairy cattle, and one analysis for sheep. We managed 3 different data sets towards 3 different manuscripts. So the sheep manuscript is currently under review. and the dairy and beef manuscripts are being closed to submit. So first, the sheep results. The data set was split in two subsets, like Alejandro presented. So the growing lambs, younger than 12 months old, and the mature sheep, older than 12 months old. So the IPCC growing lambs equation, which considers an emission factor of 4.5%, performed worst among all equations. And overall, the increase in model complexity resulted in more accurate models. And this equation, the 3.5 developed equation, including gross energy intake and dietary forage content, performed the best among all equations, but it was associated with a large mean and slope bias. The methane yield, the prediction of methane yield by sheep. So the methane yield was predicted using dietary forage content in this simple equation, and in a more complex equation, also including body weight and feeding level. Feeding level was expressed dry matter intake as a proportion of body weight. So moving to the dairy cattle equation. So in this run, these models were performed using a whole data set without splitting by subsets. Okay, so the methane production by dairy cattle was predicted by using equations including dry matter intake or only gross energy intake, and was also predicted by more complex equations including dry matter intake and energy corrected milk. So, and performed better than the IPCC equations. The methane yield by dairy cattle was predicted by more complex models, including body weight, feeding level, and energy corrected milk. Now we are also for dairy cattle. Now we're running a second analysis. Now splitting the data set and confining and grazing cows. There was created a contrast between the subsets regarding dietary NDF and forage content. And the idea is to further improve the developed models. But the equations are not ready right now. Moving to the beef cattle prediction equation. So again, for beef cattle, for this analysis, for this first run, we did not split the data set. So we considered the whole data set, our data set. And the equations developed using the beef cattle data set performed better than the IPCC equations. However, all developed equations had RSR larger than 1. And this equation, the simple equation, including only average daily gain as a predictor, had the lowest RSR, 1. The methane yield by beef cattle was better predicted including only feeding level as a predictor variable. And for this second analysis we are running right now, we are splitting the subset, the whole data set in subsets according to the dietary forage content. So only forage, high forage between 94 and 54, and low forage subset, lower than 50% forage content. So the idea is to further improve the models for beef cattle. So at the end of the Latin America flagship, Alex asked me to consult our collaborators about the possibility to share data about nitrogen excretion. So we have built a nitrogen excretion database, including beef cattle, dairy, and sheep. This database contains almost 3,000 individual observations. So the idea is to develop prediction models for nitrogen excretion. So sorry by the hurry, but many thanks to the New Zealand government, Ag Research, and Global Research Alliance, all collaborators that provided data and their institutions. And thanks to Alex, Andre, and Olga, and people from AgroSavia, where I spent amazing 2 years. So I'm happy to answer the questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Guillermo, and for a very interesting presentation. Such an amount of work that's going on there. We don't have any questions in the Q&A yet. I might just ask you some questions. You mentioned there in relation to feed additives, Bovaer and seaweeds, for example. And we know that Bovaer has recently become registered in Brazil, of course, which is great. I'm just wondering about the uptake of feed additives in Latin America. Will that be an issue, or how is that strategy going to work? How are you going to include the feed additives in the feed, and will the farmers, take them on? Will there be good uptake?
So your question is about the feasibility of the implementation?
Yes. Implementation, exactly.
Yes, thank you for your question, Sinead. I think that it will be included, will be updated by the feedlots, the beef feedlots, I think, because there are a study here for beef feedlots, but for grazing systems, I think that it's not. I think there need more data to
absolutely
to improve this technology. And for example, in Brazil, we have around 87% of all beef cattle we slaughtered came from pastures, and only 13% from grazing. So it's a short fraction.
Yeah, and that's not just, it's the same, I guess, across the world. Even for example, in Ireland, it's mainly pasture-based systems also. So I would agree with you. I think it'll be probably when these feed additives are available at pasture that we can, try and get implementation to be improved, and that will be the big, I suppose, challenge for us. I have another question just in relation to your data. Has that helped refine your inventories? You've got a lot of data there. Has that helped to, for your national inventories for Brazil?
So I think that the equations can help the countries to improve the greenhouse gas inventories. But we are closing the beef and the dairy papers, but I think that the equations will fit well than the IPCC equations.
Great. Well, thank you, Guillermo. In the interest of time, we'll move on, and thank you for your presentation, and we may come up with some more questions at the end. Thanks very much for all your hard work. So our next presentation, we're going off to another part of the world, Asia. So our next presenter is Dr. Huan Bu Liang from the Institute of Tropical Agriculture and Food Security at the University of Putra in Malaysia. Dr. Liang's presentation is entitled Southeast Asia Cattle Methane Emissions Project. So over to you, Dr. Liang.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Oh, depending where you are, morning, good afternoon, or evening. My project, what I'm going to do is to give a brief report on the Southeast Asia Cattle Methane Emission Project.
Juan, can you go into presentation mode? Yeah, it's just over.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, just click. Thank you. That's great.
Sorry for the mistake.
Okay. Not at all. Not at all. It's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to give a very brief report on our project entitled Southeast Asia Cattle Methane Emission Project. Before I start, I must acknowledge the contributor of this to this project. They are either contributing data sets or other technical supports. Without their help, this project will not be materialized. So a very brief introduction on on Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is made up of 10 countries, including Malaysia, which I live in. And in terms of land size, we are about half the size of USA. But in terms of human population, we are twice that of USA, making up about 8.5% of the world population. Southeast Asia has about 70 million heads of large ruminant cattle and water buffaloes, and nearly 60 million heads of small ruminant. The special feature is that majority of these ruminant livestock are raised by small farmers, or smallholders farmers. So because of the smallholder farming system, wide range of feeding resources and feeding practices are offered to the animals. Now, for example, grazing around villages and under perennial crops such as oil palm and rubber plantation is widely practiced. Store fed with cut forages plus various amount of and type of feed material are often given to the animal as well. Agriculture byproducts are almost the main source of feed given to these beef cattle in Southeast Asia. For example, rice straw, oil palm fronds, fruits, and food waste. The majority of the animals are Zebu type of cattle, and they are crossbreds, and also they are managed under various husbandry practices. Asia, after Latin America and Caribbean, is the second major contributor of global enteric methane emission. The bulk of the enteric methane emission from Asia, and particularly Southeast Asia, is from beef cattle. Because of the majority of the livestock in Southeast Asia are raised by smallholders farming, a wide range of feeding sources and husbandry practice, which resulted in different methane emission characteristics as compared to the other region. Thus, the objective of our project is to develop methane emission prediction equation using animal and feed data from Southeast Asia and validate them with published models. We were very happy when we were offered the project, but when we started the project, then at the initial stage, we faced several challenges and also questions that we asked ourselves at the initial stage. Because we know that there is a lack of facilities for in vivo methane measurement from Southeast Asia. We know that there is no respiration chamber except some head hoods and head boxes available in only some research institute in Southeast Asia. So we are wondering how much data can we get from Southeast Asia, and also who owns the data. So this leads, and at the same time, we know that there was some joint research on methane emission between the Japanese and some Southeast Asia institutions, such as in Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So with that background, we organized a workshop, expert workshop in December 2019 at Kuala Lumpur, and we invited some collaborators from Southeast Asia countries, Japan and USA to attend the workshop. So we managed to get 18 collaborators or participants in the workshop. The workshop was rather successful, and from the discussion, we realized that the Japanese and Southeast Asia Joint Research Team, which I just mentioned just now, are the potential contributor of data for the project. But at that stage, we are still uncertain of the number of data available. So we decide to collect data from large and from all data available from large and small ruminants. Several months after the workshop, which is around mid-2020, then we have collected just slightly over 1,000 individual animal observations from cattle and small ruminants from 36 contributors from study starting between 1993 to 2018. And we found that the cattle data from Southeast Asia were all beef cattle, while in East Asia, that is Japan and China, part of China, were consisted of dairy and beef cattle. Because of the importance of beef cattle in Asia, in Southeast Asia, and the availability of data, we focus this project only on beef cattle. We also realized that from the data we collected that methane emission measurement was 88% of the methane emission measurement from the data from Southeast Asia studies were from using head food, while 12% using head boxes. The question is again how precise the precision of using respiration full body respiration chamber versus the head hood and head chamber. After the data, the collection of the data, they were analyzed used screening and data cleaning process, and at the end we collected 398 data set from Southeast Asia and 104 from East Asia. We categorize the data into 3 categories: all forage category, containing 100% forage, high forage containing between 50 to 85% forage, and low forage subsets to represent the diverse feeding practice of beef cattle feeding in Southeast Asia. So this is a summary of the data that we have collected. I don't have the intention to go into the detail, but again, just briefly inform you that all the total data, 398 data set, the data that we have from Southeast Asia, we are divided into all forage, 119, a high forage, 163, and the rest are under low forage. And this data set were used to develop methane prediction model, develop methane yield, intensity models as well, and then validate with published data, published model and performance evaluation, undergo this evaluation. I'm pleased to inform you that we have just completed the manuscript. Currently is under submission stage. As I said just now, I don't intend to go into the detail of the result or the analysis, but I just want to run through some of the results that we obtained. Firstly, dry matter intake is a key predictor of beef cattle methane emission in Southeast Asia. inclusion of NDF, that is DMI plus NDF, improve prediction accuracy, and measurement to obtain additional variables such as crude protein ether extract and animal variables like body weight are not justified for the small gain over that of the dry matter and NDF. So, and our study also recommended methane emission prediction equation for 3 different forage categories based on dry matter intake plus NDF, and in cases where the DMI alone is available. So these are some of the equations that we produce. As I said just now, I do not intend to go to detail, but this is available in our manuscript. Our study, when compared with other studies, we found that published data prediction equation and methane conversion factor based on Southeast Asia data perform better than those from other regions. Study does affirm that methane prediction model and YM specific to the region are necessary to provide accurate prediction of beef cattle emission at national or regional level. We like to acknowledge the funding agency, the New Zealand government, as well as all our collaborators to make this project successful. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liang. Are there any questions for Dr. Liang? Please put them in the Q&A. Just while we're waiting for some to come in, I'm just interested in the head boxes for the cattle that you were measuring methane in. This is probably similar to, is it similar to green feed system? I suppose my question is, how long does the animal have to stay under the hood? And how does it compare to the chambers?
Sorry, I didn't get your question very clearly. Are you asking me?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. The head hood. So, how long does the animal have to stay in the head hood to get some good methane measurements?
Okay, the head hood allows the animal to stay within the head hood all 24 hours. So they are almost close to the full body chamber. While the head box, then it is different. They only measure for 15, 20 or half an hour measurement each at different interval over the days.
Great, thank you. And then do they go back during a study? They have the opportunity to go back to the head hood on numerous times.
During not, are you asking when they are not in measurement?
Yeah, for a study, how many of those measurements would you need?
I'm not very sure what how many boxes do they have.
Yeah.
Normally a couple of them, like 4 to 6, depending on which institute.
Okay, and I have a question here. I suppose it's a related question from Islam. He says, which is the most precise method to measure methane, the full body or the head hood?
Very interesting. I have, if you allow me to go quickly back to the slide.
Yeah, we probably missed it, sorry.
Actually, I think it's all depending on how you construct the head hood. Okay, this is, for example, this is a slide. The chamber. I actually have the privilege of spending 6 months, 25 years ago, to start to work in this 4 respiration chamber in Japan. My study there was to compare the use of full body chamber versus face mask, not a box, not a chamber, not a headwood. And of course, the accuracy is not that good, because when you approach the animal, because you need to bring in the animal into from the pens to the to where you want to measure. So animals are kind of a bit excited. So the measurement is some kind of not as accurate as possible, but not as accurate as you wanted to. But surprisingly, I think our data, the data that we have collected, give very good result. So I think that training is important.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Liang. We might move on now, because we only have a few minutes left to our panel discussion. And if I can welcome back the panelists and Andre and the team, and maybe we just finalize some of the remaining questions and draw the session to a close. So we have one just last question that was posed for Guillermo, and it was asking, it was Etu Kinsley Agbor. It says it's an interesting study, Guillermo, and which can help other countries around the world. And he's asking, can these equations help? Are they available?
Sorry, I just answered. The equations are
perfect. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, but maybe in time when you publish, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So I guess a common theme as well that's coming up on this is particularly in relation to feed additives, is, I suppose, application on pasture. And I guess, you know, we probably need some more work. And thank you, Claudia, for that very comprehensive answer in the Q&A or the chat there. It was very useful, I think, for people on this webinar today. And it's an important point that the feed additive needs to be with the feed at all times for it to be effective, I guess. And we probably need, as a network, to do probably more work on trying to develop feed additives that are effective on pasture-based systems or grazing, where an animal can be able to come in and feed maybe once a day or, you know, once every few days. So I think there is research going on around the world to that effect. But that's just to address some of the questions that were coming in, and thanks to Claudia for addressing that. Andre, you might, before we finish, you might want to give us an update on, say, our next meeting, which is scheduled to happen in Florida.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that would be, yes, I can hear you. Yeah, very good. Perfect.
Okay. We want to have a physical meeting next year in conjunction with the GGAA meeting that's held in Florida. So I believe it's in June. It will be on a Sunday afternoon preceding the main conference. And there we want to discuss where the Feed and Nutrition Network Group is heading for. New initiatives that will take place. There will be a change of chair, which is not so important to mention now, but it will happen. Now and then we change chairs with network groups. And we also want to present results from another project that we didn't talk about today, but that's the CEDARS project. So we reserved, let's say, mainly that meeting for CEDARS results presentations. But we will also discuss new initiatives that we want to take. And one of them is feed additives. We have done a lot of collaborative work on methodology and position papers on nitrogen, enteric methane, also heading a bit towards excretion. But feed additives are quite an important element coming up, and they show quite some potential, but there are also many questions on how to investigate them, how to implement them, what does it mean, how effective are they, and how does that depend on, let's say, management conditions or feeding conditions. So we want to, as a Feed and Nutrition Network Group, we want to go ahead with that topic, feed additives, and we will discuss that next year. But there's already an initiative within the GRA for 2 flagships, and one of them was pinpointed to the topic of feed additives. It's not entirely certain how we go ahead, but it has been highlighted as one of the activities that we want to pick up. Yeah, and everybody is welcome to join the Feed and Nutrition Network Group. Some areas of the world, they're still a bit lacking in our membership, So they are invited to become member and to join in the club, let's say, and participate. So it's not a restricted group globally that is doing this kind of work. In principle, everybody who can contribute is welcome to join and discuss with us. I think that's enough for the update, no? Cindy, or you will want something?
That's perfect. No, that's great, Andre. Thank you so much. And I would reiterate that, I suppose, as co-chair of the LRG, we'd like to, I suppose, encourage, and particularly younger scientists, mid-career scientists, all you know, even people from industry, all are welcome, and to join us and to join the network, and that goes for all the networks if you have an interest in it. So I would agree with what Andre is saying, and also, as he mentioned there, we have an interest, I guess, in feed additives. We're trying to explore a new flagship. We're working out basically how the funding regime is going to come about, and you know, so we really want to welcome people to join that. If you have studies on feed additives ongoing, perhaps contact Andre or myself or any of the group in the FNN in relation to joining that flagship, and we hope to scope that out in the coming months. And I suppose before we finish, I'm not sure if any of the panelists would like to say anything before we finish. We're just gone a little bit over time. If David or any of the panelists, speakers would like to say anything before we finish. No, that's okay, that's perfect. But before we finish, I would actually like to thank all the speakers today. I thought they were all excellent, and they gave their perspective from the different parts of the globe, which was wonderful. I think we're showing the progress that's being made within the FNN, and particularly gathering, you know, international data that could potentially feed into inventories to assist in, you know, refining IPCC equations, things like that. So it's really doing a good job, and I'd like to thank Andre and David and Alex for their work in leading the network. And I'd also like to thank the attendees for joining us, and it's difficult hours for some countries around the world. It's very early or very late. So thank you for joining. We had great attendance. We had over 105 attendees during the peak of the webinar. So thank you all for that and your interest in the network and the webinar. And most importantly, I'd like to thank the GRA Secretariat, Heather and Deb, that really helped us to organise this webinar. So without them, it wouldn't really happen. So thanks to everyone in the GRA for that. So I just like to finish by wishing you all a good day, a good night, and keep in touch with the FNN. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.